Hello, my name is Anissa Halimi. I'm a research scientist at IBM. This talk is about privacy-preserving and efficient verification of the outcome in genome-wide association studies. Computational errors might occur during the workflow. For example, the published results may be computed incorrectly, or during the quality control. For example, a researcher might use low-quality data to conduct the research. It is trivial to verify the correctness of the research findings if, besides the workflow and its associated metadata, the input dataset is provided. However, the input dataset might not always be released as it may contain sensitive information about individuals. For example, Genome contains sensitive information about an individual's phenotype, ethnicity, family members, and disease conditions. In such cases, verifying the correctness of the computations becomes non-trivial. The research question we tackle in this work is how to verify the correctness of GWAS given only the workflow and its associated metadata. Let's first provide some background about genomics. The whole human genome consists of 3 billion pairs of nucleotides. It is organized in 23 pairs of chromosomes, where 99.9% of the genome is identical between any two individuals. SNPs is the most common genetic variation, which stems from differences in single nucleotides. In the vast majority of cases, a SNP is biallelic. In other words, it can take two possible alleles, major allele and minor allele. Genome-wide association studies have become a popular method for identifying genetic variations that are associated to a particular trait or phenotype. The most common approach of GWAS is the case control setup, where the genomes of the individuals that carry the phenotype cases are compared with genomes of the individuals that do not carry it controls. So basically, we get the data for each SNP from the case group and control group, perform GWAS, and obtain its output. The output of GWAS usually consists of the p-value, odds ratio, and minor allele frequencies for the most significant SNPs. Local differential privacy is a variation of traditional differential privacy. Formally, an algorithm A satisfies epsilon local differential privacy if and only if, for any input v1 and v2, the ratio of the probability av1 equal to y to probability of av2 equal to y is bounded by e to the power of epsilon. The most common way of achieving epsilon LDP is the randomized response mechanism. In randomized response, the user reports the true value of a single bit of information with probability p and flips the true value with probability q. We consider a system that includes two parties, the researcher and the verifier. The researcher creates a case control setup, performs GWAS, and shares its workflow along with its research findings and associated metadata. The metadata includes the phenotype being studied, the demographics of the research participants, the number of research participants, and the number of SNPs. As part of the metadata, the researcher also provides part of the original dataset for the most significant SNPs after adding noise to it using the randomized response mechanism to achieve LDP, which is referred as the partial noisy dataset, along with the epsilon value. The verifier has access to the workflow, its output, and metadata, and wants to check the correctness of the provided associations. On the other hand, the researcher wants to ensure that the vulnerability of the dataset participants to genomic privacy attacks does not increase due to the provided metadata. We assume an honest researcher that uses a legitimate dataset and that may unintentionally provide wrong results as the output of GWAS. We use a toy example to describe how the verification of received statistics is done by the verifier. Let D represent the dataset owned by the researcher. As discussed, the researcher provides to the verifier the statistics of the most associated SNPs, together with the SNP IDs and its associated metadata. Note that sharing the IDs and statistics of the most associated SNPs is required and allowed by many institutions, for example, NIH. First, the verifier performs GWAS on the partial noisy dataset. Then, the verifier computes the distance of the computed statistics in the partial noisy dataset from the statistics provided by the researcher using the relative error metric. Our main assumption, which we validate in the paper, is that independent of the phenotype being studied, The distance obtained between the statistics computed over d, epsilon, and d follows a similar trend for different datasets for a given epsilon value. To utilize this, the verifier computes the expected distance by using a publicly available genomic dataset E and its noisy version E epsilon, in which each data point is obfuscated using randomized response to achieve LDP. So first, the verifier performs GBAS both on E and E epsilon. Then, using the previously introduced distance matrix, the verifier computes the expected distance for each statistic for the most associated SNPs from E and E epsilon. After that, the verifier computes the error between the deviation of each statistic in D and the deviation of that particular statistic in E. It compares this value with the cutoff point. But how to compute the cutoff point? For each statistic, the verifier can heuristically set a cutoff point, depending on the error value they choose to tolerate, or can use another labeled publicly available genomic dataset F, whose phenotype does not need to be the same as the one in D. If the error is smaller than the cutoff point, then the statistic provided by the researcher is classified as being computed correctly. Otherwise, it is classified as incorrect. Please check the paper for more details. We use two different genomic datasets for evaluation, the OpenSNP dataset and the 1,000 genomes. From OpenSNP, we use lactose intolerance, hair color, and handedness. To quantify the success of the proposed verification scheme, for each statistic, we use true positive rate and true negative rate. To quantify the impact of the computational errors done by the researcher, we evaluate the utility loss of each statistic as a result of the provided incorrect values. We compute this as the distance between the statistics provided by the researcher and the ones that should have been returned as part of the research. First, we study the impact of epsilon value, the amount of noise added to the original dataset via randomized response to the true positive rate and true negative rate values. In the table, we show true positive rate values for each statistic with varying values of epsilon in lactose intolerance. We observe a true positive rate of 0.73 for p-value when epsilon is equal to 3. This means that the verifier can correctly classify 73 out of 100 p-values provided by the researcher. We show the variation of the true negative rate values with respect to the utility loss for p-values in the figure. For instance, for epsilon equal to 3, a verifier can determine with high confidence a true negative rate of at least 0.8 if the researcher has released incorrect p-values when the utility loss is at least 0.28, whereas the verifier obtains a lone true negative rate smaller than 0.4 when the released p-values are close to the correct ones. In other words, the return p-value still preserves a high utility. Plus, the proposed framework successfully detects when a weakly associated SNP is reported to have a low p-value and vice versa. We obtain similar results for the other two datasets and statistics. The previous results do not consider the p-values of the return statistics. In practice, the verifier is only interested in strongly associated SNPs with p-values smaller than 0.05. In the figure on the left, we show the error obtained by the verifier for 100 correctly computed p-values with respect to the cutoff point and their p-values for epsilon equal to 3. We observe that the verifier achieves a true positive rate of almost 1 for the strong associations. In the figure on the right, we show the error of 100 incorrect statistics and their reported p-values whose correct p-value is around 0.08. We observe that the verifier obtains a true negative rate of almost 1. We obtain similar results when we reduce the p-value threshold for strong associations. These results show that a verifier can use the proposed scheme with high confidence, especially for SNPs that are highly associated with a studied phenotype. To quantify the membership inference risk due to the release statistics, we use the likelihood ratio test by Sankaraman et al. We assume that under the null hypothesis, a target individual is not part of the case group, and under the alternate hypothesis, target individual is part of the case group. The overall likelihood ratio of an individual can be computed as shown. The aggregate allele frequencies of the case group are provided as part of the GWAS output. while the population allele frequencies can be acquired from public data sources such as 1000 genomes. To quantify the risk due to the shared partial noisy dataset, we use the Hamming distance between the genomes. Hamming distance shows the minimum number of positions at which the genome sequences are different. For instance, given X and Y, the minimum number of substitution required to convert X to Y is 2. To quantify the risk for each individual eye, we compute the Hamming distance between the target individual and all the individuals in the case group of the partial noisy dataset, and identify the minimum Hamming distance. If this distance is smaller than the threshold, then it is part of the dataset, otherwise it is not. We use lactose intolerance to evaluate the performance of membership inference attacks. We empirically built the null hypothesis using 25 individuals that are not part of the case group. For testing, we use 25 randomly selected individuals from the case group. The figure displays the power curves for likelihood ratio test for varying number of statistics. In the same figure, we also show the power curves for Hamming distance for different epsilon values while varying the number of SNPs in the partial noisy dataset. We observe that the privacy risk due to the proposed framework is lower than the one due to the released GIVA statistics when epsilon value is smaller than 5. The verifier also achieves a high true positive rate and true negative rate for such cases. To conclude, we have proposed a framework that can be used by a verifier to efficiently verify the correctness of the computations in GIVAs with high confidence. We have shown that the privacy risk of the dataset participants does not increase due to the additional information required by the proposed framework. As a future work, we will integrate the verification of the quality control steps. We will extend the proposed framework so that the verifier can check both the relevance and the correctness of the research findings. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.